Welcome back to Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Sturges here. Man, we got a great Hollywood conversation coming up with Hollywood property master Don Nunley, who has written a new book called Steve McQueen-LeMans in the Rearview Mirror. Don was the property master for LeMans. That was a very important role because of the way the film ended up being produced. We get into that in the conversation. LeMans itself is, of course, the 24-hour French race that is one of the pinnacles of auto racing. And McQueen prepped professionally and even competed in the maybe sister event to Le Mans, nonstop 12-hour race at Sebring. He came in second to Mario Andretti. And this is a Steve McQueen in the middle of his career after huge hits in the 60s from The Magnificent Seven, The Great Escape, and later on The Thomas Crown Affair and Bullitt. McQueen was in a position of power to create his own production company and finally make a film that he had been thinking about for 10 years, and that's the film Le Mans. It's a cult classic. Mr. Nunley was, as I said, the prop master, and because of that took incredible photos and has this incredible 422-image book that is 256 pages. And let me tell you, it tells the story of Le Mans in a way that you've never heard it before. There's been a documentary about Le Mans, even a graphic novel depicting Le Mans and McQueen's involvement. But this is an incredible story, and you're going to learn a lot about it. We don't spoil all the book. There's plenty of stories to share with Mr. Nunley. Not only that, but what an incredible career that Mr. Nunley had working on other big films, and we talk a little bit about films like Little Big Man with Dustin Hoffman, and also great World War II movie, The Bridge to Remagen, which, man, you'd think this was ripped out of today's headlines, but Mr. Nunley and the production company, while making this film in Czechoslovakia, had to face a Russian military invasion while they're making the movie. Very interesting conversation about that film and, of course, about Le Mans and his excellent book, Steve McQueen, Le Mans in the Rearview Mirror. That's the subject of today's Word Balloon, and I really think you're going to find a lot of fun Hollywood stories from this conversation. Word Balloon is brought to you by In Stock Trades at instocktrades.com. And believe it or not, I found some great racing comics in line with our Le Mans conversation from In Stock Trades. The great Frank Frazetta, who did a lot of great movie posters, did some incredible comics in the 40s and 50s. Among them, a comic strip about a racer, Johnny Comet. And it is great. It is midget racing, the little tiny classic racing cars, but written and drawn by Frank Frazetta. It's from Vanguard, and it's 25% off. It's just $18.71 at In Stock Trades. From IDW and the Speed Racer universe, they've reprinted Now Comics' great run on Racer X. That was a really good 90s series, and it was written by Fred Schiller and Steve Sullivan. Volumes 1 and 2 are 40% off. They're both $11.99 each, and again, if you're a racing fan, you'll want to get these books. DC and Hanna-Barbera just wrapped up Wacky Raceland. Think your favorite 60s Wacky Races cartoon mashed up with Road Warrior pictures, and you'll get this excellent series from Ken Pontac and Leonardo Manco. Lots of fun and beautiful visuals at their best. This is 42% off, $9.85. Just a few of the books with a racing motif at instocktrades.com. Don't forget, if your orders are $50 or more, you'll receive free shipping from our friends at instocktrades.com. Word Balloon is also brought to you by the League of Word Balloon listeners. Thank you, League, for your subscription support via Patreon. I get to do some amazing interviews through this podcast, and you help keep the lights on with your subscriptions. So if you think the conversations you hear at Word Balloon are worth listening to and want to contribute to the cause, go to wordballoon.com. There's an ad for Patreon right there on the front page. It will take you to my Patreon page, or you can go to patreon.com/wordballoon. And if you can spare a subscription, that would be great. Word Balloon is free. It will always be free. But if you can help the cause, that's where to go. Patreon.com/wordballoon, or just click on that Patreon ad at wordballoon.com. As I said earlier, Le Mans came at a very interesting point in Steve McQueen's life and career. In the press release, I'm going to quote it directly. At the time, McQueen was at the height of his stratospheric popularity after an amazing string of box office hits, talking about things like The Thomas Crown Affair, The Great Escape, Bullitt, The Magnificent Seven. In one fell swoop, McQueen ended a 15-year marriage, severed ties with his longtime agent and producing partners, saw his new production company collapse, and lost a personal fortune, not to mention control of LeMans, the film he had planned to make for over a decade. He was also in constant fear of his life after learning on the set that he was on Charles Manson's death list. And at the end of this film, McQueen was presented with a 7-figure bill by the IRS for back taxes. This was a very tough time in Steve McQueen's life, and we don't even touch on half of the stories that you're going to get from this book. But I think once you hear this conversation with Mr. Nunley, it's going to make you want to go out and pick up this book. So let's talk now about Steve McQueen, LeMans in the Rearview Mirror, with property master Don Nunley, now on Word Balloon. Don Nunley, welcome to Word Balloon. Congratulations on an incredible book, and I have a feeling you could probably write a few more given your long career in Hollywood.
Well, my wife tells me I can't. She said this was way too much work, and she was a big help.
How long did it take to make the book?
Well, about 2 years, 2.5 years, maybe, from the time we actually discussed doing it.
Very cool. Yeah, I saw the documentary about LeMans a couple of years ago, and the assemblage of the photographs that you had. How where did all those come from?
Well, as a prop master, my job is to match everything that needs to be matched in the film during the different time of the race. So during the actual race itself, I carried a couple of 35 millimeter cameras around and had an access pass anywhere on the track. And I shot hundreds and hundreds of pictures, so I could then go back and match these, the signaling pits or the mechanics pits or the paddock area or the private, VIP booths, all that sort of thing.
Let's talk about your history as a property master. It's interesting. I think people that are film buffs know that not only on the acting or directing side, but on the technical side, there are families that are known for a certain skill. The Westmores for makeup, for example. And
right.
Your father was a property master, but that wasn't your intended career path initially?
Not really. I was going to college mostly to play football, I think, run track. But in the meantime, I was probably getting somewhat of an education. And I had a spring break, or not a spring break, but a summer break. I was enrolled at UCLA for the fall, but I needed a summer job. My dad had never encouraged me to come into the film business, I think mainly because he knew the long hours, the time away from home when you're doing location work, the egos and people you deal with. He probably wanted something more for me. And yet I loved what he did. He was very good at it. He worked at Universal Studios for 44 years.
Wow.
One studio, which nobody does anymore. Back then it was very rare. And he did huge films for them, but back in an era where they didn't give prop master screen credit. And he did pictures like Spartacus and the American Warlords, did all the Francis the Talking Mule, the Bud Abbott Costello pictures, Mom Pa Kettle, did all those films and never got his name on one of them, which was a shame because he certainly deserved it.
I noticed that in the book you mentioned you were on the set for Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. Man, don't get me wrong, Spartacus is amazing, but, obviously there's a lot of iconic shine to Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein as well.
Well, as a kid, it was definitely a highlight because in those days at the studios, they were a little more friendly, and once in a while you could bring somebody in like your kid. And my dad brought me in as a treat. I don't remember. I was around 9 years old, I think, but I met Bud Abbott and Lou Costello.
Wow.
I met Bela Lugosi. I laid in Dracula's coffin. I saw Lon Chaney Jr. getting makeup to be the Wolfman. And boy, I remember that so vividly. That's probably when deep down in my heart I said, I'd like to do this.
Wow. That's really amazing. And then you got into TV and did a lot of Westerns and other shows. To rattle off some of your television credits as a property master.
Well, I did a couple of years in McHale's Navy, which was more fun than you can think, with Tim Conway and and that cast and crew were just terrific.
Yeah.
I did Streets of Laredo with Neville Brand. I did The Rifleman, Chuck Connors. I worked on Zingray Theater.
Wow.
I did, in those days you kind of bounced around. And I first met Steve McQueen on the set of Wanted Dead or Alive. But I was just a lonely fourth or fifth broom, as they call it, on the set. And I think I met him more with a nod of my head and a smile than, going over and shaking his hand.
That's cool. What were your early impressions of him? That was only one season, and it seemed like his film career really took off after that one season. But you probably know the chronology better than I do.
Well, Steve was known as a difficult actor. He didn't show up on time. He wanted to do it his way, no matter what the director or the script said. And he held out, and he was difficult. He was not everybody's favorite guy on the set. At least the crew didn't mind him. He was fine, but he did cost them a lot of time. And so Steve always, I think, had that rebel in him.
Well, I guess it served him well in some roles. I mean, and we'll talk about the collaboration with John Sturges as far as Lemmons goes, but certainly in those formative years, he and John Sturges made, some incredible movies, Magnificent Seven and The Great Escape, that really, kind of crystallized the McQueen character.
Exactly. And if you really owe anything to Steve's success with Poppy, John Sturges' early faith in him. And Steve didn't disappoint. He held his own in those casts with all these A-class actors. He certainly was not a disappointment. And a lot of people remember Steve in those pictures more than they do the other actors.
Totally. Absolutely. God, the iconic motorcycle jump in Great Escape. And just like you said, man, Magnificent Seven, so many other great, in both movies, so many A-level actors, as you say, and yet McQueen, definitely does stand out. It's, as the 60s progressed, going into Lemmons, he had done Thomas Crown Affair and he had done Bullet and really was at the top of his game. And am I hearing correctly that he was kind of jealous of the movie Grand Prix with John Frankenheimer and James Garner?
Well, I think he felt they beat him to the punch.
Okay.
Because he had this movie. He'd worked on putting this movie together for 10 years. He didn't have the clout to do it. He couldn't do it until he basically became the number one actor in Hollywood. In fact, this movie almost didn't get made. Warner Brothers owned it and was going to make it. And the last minute, they put it into turnaround, which is another term for saying we're not going to do it, find another financer. And Cinema Center Films, where I had just finished the picture, I just finished Little Big Man with Dustin Hoffman and Faye Dunaway and Arthur Penn directing. And the studio saw this opportunity to have the number one box office draw in the world at the time, doing a racing picture after Bullet. They thought it was a no-brainer, so they grabbed it. The only problem, and it was a problem throughout the picture, there was not a finished script. And but they felt they could still wing it, put it together. They brought in Sturges, who had obviously a track record with Steve, and they felt the two of them could hammer it out, and they'd have what they wanted. So if you read the book, you'll find out that really never happened.
Yeah, it's incredible because this really is the height of Steve McQueen's clout in Hollywood and appeal, and yet this really is, as you kind of pull out in the making of the film Lemmons, but also what happens afterwards. This is really the start of the fall of Steve McQueen.
It certainly set him back. While we were shooting the picture, Steve was going through a divorce from his 15-year marriage with Neely. He obviously was not getting along with John Sturges or his producers, his friends that had been with him for years. Bob Railier, a good friend. He was having problems with his agent. He was found out he was on the Charlie Manson hit list. He found out the IRS was after him.
Wow.
So he had a lot going on.
Incredible. And, Go on.
Plus, he never had a script. They never agreed on a script day to day. We were set to shoot about 70% of the movie, in the first 24 hours at the race itself. And because Steve, at the last minute, was told he could not drive in the race, and Steve was a competent race driver. He had just driven in Sebring and done very well. And he intended to drive our camera car in the race. Well, the insurance company said, no way, because if anything happened to Steve, he is the movie.
Yeah.
Our whole backing of the film, but you guys call us on it, and it cost us, I think it was, the budget at that time was around $3.5 to $4 million. And so they said, well, he can drive, but the premium on his life for 24 hours will be $3.5 to $4 million.
Wow.
Well, needless to say, the studio wasn't going to do that. So they told him he couldn't drive. And because he couldn't drive, Steve refused to put on his pilot suit and walk out on the apron before the race with all the other drivers, as they all do, and wave at the crowd and get cheers, because all these guys are famous in Europe.
Sure.
Joe Sifford, Bell, Brian Redrum, Jackie Hicks, you name it. And they're all movie stars there. So it would have been perfectly normal for people to go nuts when Steve walked out there and waved at him. We would have had shots of him with, on the grandstands alone, 150,000 people going crazy. And then he refused to walk through the paddock with the pilot suit on, with the same reaction he would have gotten, which would have been great for us in the film. So when he refused to do that, that meant that about 40% of the stuff we wanted to shoot the day of the race, we couldn't shoot.
Wow.
And that meant we had to recreate it all.
Say that again, sir. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I mean, we had to end up recreating the paddock and all the pit stuff and all the grandstands. We had to hire thousands of extras, trying to piece together shots, fill the screen with people like you would have normally during the race itself. And that cost the studio a lot of money and a lot of time. That job fell on me, by the way. I ended up being the one that had to put the paddock together with over 50 support vehicles and all the tents and all the, get the people to send back their crews for the tire companies. And it was quite an undertaking.
Yeah, to match the continuity of you live at Le Mans and then, having to recreate it and everything. And again, as you said, that's why you got all those great photographs and everything, and it ended up being great for the book and the documenting the this production. That am I hearing right that there was kind of a conflict because do you have a story, or do you really just make it about the race in almost a documentary sort of way?
Steve wanted more of the documentary. He had just finished a picture that he produced called On Any Given Sunday, which was really a documentary on motorcycle racing. Mm-hmm. And he thought he wanted to kind of do the same thing. It was very successful, by the way. That picture cost a couple of $1 million and grossed $22 million in the States.
Wow! So
he thought he could do the same with with motor cars, and obviously that wasn't going to be what people wanted to pay to go in the theaters and see with Steve McQueen in the film.
That's amazing. Now, who doubled for McQueen during the race? Or
he did. Well, during the race, we worked with the John Heuer racing team, Porsche racing team, mm-hmm. and then driving his car in the race was Joe Sifford and Bart Bell. Also with the team, that Porsche team, were Brian Redmond and Jackie, not Jackie Hicks, but Pedro Rodriguez.
Okay.
And these guys drove the actual race with the car numbers that we would use. So you never saw them close enough. But when we reshot everything and at speed, Steve did the driving. He did the driving with cameras mounted in front of him on the car. He did some amazing stuff. We bought a GT40 and mounted cameras on that and went alongside him down the Mulsanne Straight at 225 miles an hour. Steve was a competent driver.
That's cool.
So for some reason, the insurance company said if we were actually filming him in the car, close-ups, he could drive. So that's what we did.
Interesting.
But,
go ahead, sir.
Well, I was just going to say the book really delves into, I think it'll appeal to people who like movies, like obviously Steve McQueen fans,
sure,
race fans, and the behind-the-scenes look. I'm very happy with the story that came out. People have read it, say they really enjoyed the story, and then the pictures, of course, a lot of them have never been seen before. So I'm pleased and proud of the book. the publisher,
Dalton?
What? I can't say it.
Is it Dalton?
Yeah. The publisher did a wonderful job. Dalton wants some fine books. It's a beautiful book. I'm very proud of the way it looks, so I'm happy with all the work we put into it.
No, it's fantastic. And as you say, it's a really compelling read. In addition to that, the photography is absolutely amazing. And the book also is nice because I saw at the end of the example I was given that there are limited edition versions of the book that you're willing to sign where the proceeds will go to a really worthy cause.
That's right. They actually approached us if we'd be willing to partner with them. And I wasn't thrilled with an idea of putting kind of an ad in the back of the book, but the organization is a really strong, worthwhile organization dedicated to clean water around the world. And they've approached me to do a limited number of my photographs and do a signed limited edition. So that'll be interesting.
That's terrific. Yeah, the Water Foundation. And at the end of the show, I'll repeat that charity information. But yeah, clean water is obviously so important in today.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think it's great that you partnered up with those people. I'm curious back to Joe Siffert because one of the drivers that did the LeMans driving. There's a lot of iconic labeling on McQueen's the race suit, and in addition to that, it's very funny because now the iWatch has kind of made the watch important again. I thought with clocks on our phones that watches were going to go away, but a very important piece of technology at the time was also a watch, and I know Joe Siffert and the Heuer Corporation were involved in that. I think it's a really interesting story if you don't mind going into it.
So, one of the jobs of a prop master is to supplies all the personal items for the actor for his part. And of course, the wristwatch is vital and something that all of them wear and refer to. A lot of the drivers are sponsored by watch companies. The Heuer company has a wonderful patch, and Steve liked the look of the patch. He wanted to look like Joe Siffert, who wore the patch. And so I got several. I called the Heuer company in Switzerland. I actually got through to Jack Heuer, the founder of the company, and he was very excited about participating. And he sent me some samples of watches, and I laid them out on a table along with various patches and things that Steve might want to use. I had the Omega Moon watch I just worn to the moon. I had several Rolexes, all these top watches, and said, let's put the pictures of the drivers out so Steve could look at them. He said, I want the Heuer patch. We knew he was going to wear the Gulf Western patch because that was the Porsche team sponsor. He wore Firestone patch. That was the tires they used. And a lot of drivers wore cigarette patches like Marlboro. Steve did not want to do that, to his credit. He didn't want to be involved with the cigarette. So he said, I'll wear the Heuer patch. And then he took the watches and picked up the Omega watch and put it on. He said, I like this watch. I said, Steve, excuse me, but you probably wouldn't wear an Omega watch with a Heuer patch on your uniform because it was probably sponsored by Heuer. He said, oh, you're right. So then he turned, I had like 4 different versions of Heuer chronographs. And I thought he'd pick up one that kind of looked like the others. So he picked probably the most obvious watch, distinctive looking watch I've ever seen, which is the square blue face, white dial Heuer chronograph. He said, I like this one. I said, fine, no problem with me. So he put it on. That's the watch he decided to wear. Well, I'd been warned by his makeup man that Steve had a habit of going home with things. He never saw them again. So he said, I bring 6 electric razors with me on every picture, and I end up with one if I'm lucky. I said, well, I can't do that. So I called Jack Heuer back and told him that we had chosen his watch and which one it was, and I needed to get 6 of them. And he said, well, I'll do what I can do. I said, I need them pretty quick. So he gave them to a courier who brought them across the border, paid the duty on them, got them to me, and that watch became, as you may know, extremely famous and very expensive. One sold last year at almost $700,000.
One of the originals.
The original were 400.
Oh, man. Okay. Because, you sold a couple of the ones used on the film subsequently, didn't you?
I did. As prop master at the end of the film, I return stuff. I try to be very faithful at returning whatever is loaned to me. And I called Jack, and I said, Jack, we're finished with the picture. Where do you want me to send the watches? He said, will you want them? Wow. I said, well, sure, I would like them, but I can't take them for free. That wouldn't be, the studio wouldn't like that. He said, send me a couple $100.
Wow.
which I did. And I ended up with 3 of the McQueen watches at the end.
Oh, my God.
And I sold them all in the last 10 years.
That's a nice retirement package. That's fantastic.
Well, I got more for the watches than I got paid on the whole movie.
I understand. That's amazing. I have to ask. Go ahead.
I had a great time. I called Bob Relier, the producer of the film, after I sold the last watch. And we'd stayed in touch over the years. And I said, well, Bob, I finally got paid what I was worth on the movie. He said, what do you mean? And I told him what I sold the watches for. I thought he was going to faint.
That's excellent. Well, again, and we'll talk a little bit more about the production and everything, and really what a nightmare it was that you all had to go through. But on the watch, it is incredible. I have a friend who was an executive with Tag Heuer within the last 20 years. And, and, I mean, I have friends that have wanted the Steve McQueen watch from LeMans. And, I mean, it really is impressive. And not only can I see, obviously, and I know they still sell models of it, which still go for like a nice, like $8,000, I think, right? I mean, something ridiculous, $4,000. But I also, wonder if in today's iWatch world, how you can have, you can change your desktop on your computer. I'm sure you can change your desktop on iPhone. I'm surprised they don't go into some sort of deal with Tag Heuer, and so that modern people can have that incredible face that is on the watch. I mean, believe me, I think I would rather have the watch itself or even a copy of it. But it is such a distinct looking interface for a timepiece.
It is a beautiful watch, and you're right. They made 2 or 3 versions of commemorative watches, and they now refer to it as the Steve McQueen watch.
It's the real name of it was the Monaco, but yeah, absolutely, man. So if people want to look it up, exactly. I'm sure I have a picture on wordballoon.com right there on our episode as we're speaking. But so things did not work out with John Sturges, which, man, I am such a Sturges fan, and I think I think all of his movies are really, really incredible. I finally saw a movie he did with Ricardo Montalban. Mercy Street, I want to say, is what it was called, and it was so interesting. It was one of his early movies. But what happened between Sturges and McQueen?
Well, Steve and Sturges were supposedly sitting down, hammering out a script, because we started shooting, like I say, without a script, just an outline. They never could come to terms. Steve wanted to make strictly a racing movie, and Sturges wanted to make a movie with a story. Maybe even a love story, maybe something, of human interest. Steve was not interested. And we had 3 sets of writers working all the time. And don't forget, we're shooting every day when this is going on. And they would hand us at night, after we wrapped, 3 different versions of what we might shoot tomorrow. That was a nightmare for me, of course. One of the problems I had was matching the cars, because you're doing a 24-hour race. And the cars look different every hour.
Sure.
And they would say, we're going to shoot hour 6 in the morning with such and such cars, and hour 10 in the evening with such and such cars. So I had to match those cars. Some of the cars would work early and late. We'd always be bringing them up or down, depending on what they needed to look like at the start or the end of the race. So that was a nightmare. And then the fact that Steve would get on the set and refused to come out of his trailer, so we jumped from what we were supposed to shoot to something else so we could shoot something.
Wow.
I think we shot for 6 weeks without one word of recorded dialogue and without casting a leading lady. Jeez. So that was a first for me.
Man. Yeah, and then you get into in the book about the casting not only for the leading lady but also another Louise Edlund.
Oh, Louise Edlund, yes.
And
She
man,
was a delight.
yeah, and my God, your pictures. I mean, she's lovely. I apparently not only did audiences find her lovely, but Mr. McQueen obviously found her very interesting.
Yeah, Steve was he was known to disappear into his trailer on the set for an hour or two with a lady now and then, and we always assumed they were just discussing marching, but I'm not sure.
I understand. Well, hey, man, he was at the top of the world and a good-looking guy. I mean, and I really think,
right.
Thomas Crown Affair really, I think, showed a very debonair side of him that maybe didn't come through on the action movies and stuff.
That's true. And, Steve was a charming guy. I wasn't, he and I were not the kind of guys that would have been bosom buddies because I didn't ride motorcycles. I didn't know anything about the race world until I did this film.
Okay.
So he and I get along well, but I didn't hang out with him. And, I provided to him what he needed and wanted on the film, and he was grateful for that. So I would say overall, I'd give him, for the people I've worked with, a 7 or an 8 on a scale of 10
okay.
for me. I'd give Jack Lemmon a 10 and maybe Gene Wilder a 10. But it was fine. It was a good experience. It was tough work, and it was... I think that the outcome of the film speaks for itself. It's beautifully shot, wonderful racing footage. Probably never be ever. They'll probably never make another film as good as that one because now they refer to computer generated, CGI.
Yes.
And that all looks like cartoons to me. I just can't get into those. They don't look right to me. But ours was done live, real.
Did you end up seeing Days of Thunder when it came out? Was there any interest in seeing that after making a film like LeMans?
I did see it, and I personally thought just what I said. It looked to me like it was all computer generated.
Interesting. I understand. You mentioned Jack Lemmon. You worked on an incredible film that he made that is one of the smaller films. I know he was nominated for Best Actor for Save the Tiger, but I don't think people necessarily, when they start rattling off Lemmon films, it's Odd Couple and some of the comedies, and certainly younger audiences know him from Grumpy Old Men. But Save the Tiger is really such an incredible drama, and it's pretty cool that you got to work on that film.
And he actually won the Academy Award that year for the film.
Did he? Oh, I totally forgot. That's awesome. Yeah. My God. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm probably getting that confused with Tribute. Another great.
I don't know. It was Jack Lemmon and Jack Guilford. Basically two actors, and working with them was amazing because they both were excellent actors.
Agreed. And Guilford really with a big comedy background himself, and it's a fantastic film about two businessmen really facing bankruptcy in a lot of ways, kind of simpatico to Glengarry Glen Ross. 15 years later.
Exactly.
So, no, tremendous. And shame on me. That's awesome. I totally forgot he won the Oscar that year. So that's awesome. Very, very cool. No, I can't imagine. And also, Little Big Man. That's fantastic. I know you mentioned it earlier. And that's another great movie. Very subtle Western, smart comedy and everything. And a wonderful, look at Native Americans and stuff. I think it's a very, back then, unfortunately, you didn't have a real Native American playing it, but I thought Hoffman was great, and I really do think it's a tremendous film.
Yeah, and Chief Dan George in the film was amazing. He's I believe at that time, certainly the only American, he wasn't American, he was Canadian Indian.
Oh, wow.
I guess he's still Indian. He was Canadian, that was nominated for Academy Award for playing Old Mudskins.
Great movie. Richard Mulligan as General Custer. Faye Dunaway is excellent. And in fact, I just saw her scene. Turner Classic Movies did a great one-on-one interview with her from their film festival. So, do you get out on stuff like that? Yeah. I mean, I wondered with the book. I hope. Like I said, you've got these amazing stories. You just kind of barely touch on them in the book beyond LeMans. And I think, you've got to have a ton of stories about all this stuff. You should do a podcast, sir. That would be great.
There we go. I think looking back at my career, I made like 30 feature films, Some I'm very proud of. Some were a job. But Little Big Man stands out as probably my favorite film, mainly because they allowed us to do it right. We had Arthur Penn on one side. If the studio said, don't spend the money, I'd say, go tell Arthur. And Arthur would say, no, he's spending the money, which really made my job more difficult but better because I could do it right. And I really appreciated that. And, some films are memorable for one reason and some for another. LeMans is really remarkable in my mind because I was only 30 years old, had a huge responsibility. I was working with the top director and star in the world in a foreign country with an interesting subject matter. And all the complications that were happening, you kind of took in your stride back then. You just made it work somehow. But I think the people, if they buy the book and read it, will find it fascinating to get a good behind-the-scenes look at a major motion picture that was never smooth. Steve McQueen at the top of his career. The race itself, I think the pictures really do make the book come alive. I'm very proud of it.
Agreed. I think it's a wonderful book, and I think the legend of LeMans has grown since its initial. Would you call it a failure, or did it make money?
Well, it was a disappointment. It wasn't a failure because the picture, I think, its initial release was around $22 million, which made Minute was in the black, but not a lot. Not what they expected. Okay. Because obviously they had the biggest star in the world. But the picture over the years has, like you say, grown in its appreciation, considered to be one of the 10 best racing films ever made, mostly because of the racing, not because of the story.
I have two more questions, if I can trouble you, about a couple other productions. One, the bridge at, is it Remagen?
Remagen.
Remagen. Thank you. Great movie, great World War II movie. Made it a very interesting time when was it Czechoslovakia that you guys were at?
That's correct. That's correct.
This is right during their revolution, or I should say, you'll probably tell it better. The leader, it was a Soviet country, but this leader had some leeway for a long time and kind of was able to kind of relax some communist or Soviet kind of edicts, and then they kind of came down on him. And am I right? Wasn't that while you guys were making the movie?
That's true. It was Dubček was the leader, beloved by the people, and we were there shooting when the Russians invaded the country.
Wow!
We were shooting a war film with tons of American equipment and German equipment. We had built a huge set over the Baltova River, which was supposed to be the Rhine River, shooting a historical event, the capture of the Ludendorff Bridge by the Americans at the town of Remagen. And it was changed the war. Eisenhower thought it might have ended the war 6 months sooner because we were able to put 50,000 troops across this bridge that didn't collapse for some reason. And anyhow, we're in the middle of shooting this picture, and I was working with 1,500 extras every day, dressed up as American soldiers and refugees and German soldiers. And every day while we were shooting, there'd be a reconnaissance Russian plane fly over, watching us down there. And it looked like we were holding maneuvers of some sort. And I think we may have caused the invasion. I'm not sure, but they decided to put a stop to what was going on. And overnight, they invaded the country. And it was amazing. We were stuck there for several days. We couldn't shoot the picture anymore. We had to be escorted out of the country by the embassy. It's a good picture, by the way, if you ever want to see a good World War II picture. We finally finished the picture we shot in Hamburg, Germany, and then went to Rome and shot at Lake Castel Gandolfo. And finally finished the picture.
I agree. It is a very, very good World War II movie, especially coming in 1969. George Segal and Robert Vaughn and Ben Gazzara among the cast.
Exactly.
Yeah, and if this is a fictional story, correct me. Robert Vaughn, about 10 years ago, maybe on BBC Radio, did a little play called "Solo Behind the Iron Curtain," and it was about this time making bridge at Remagen. And in the story, there was a production assistant that was a local Czechoslovakian that wanted to defect. And they kind of smuggle her out when you guys had to leave. And is that apocryphal, or do you know anything about that, or was I sucked into some fiction?
That's possibly so. But what happened, what I know happened, is that I went to Hamburg. They shut the picture down, put it in force majeure, which is act of war. Decided, because then they don't have to pay anybody or anything, but they asked me to stay and they'd pay me, because if they started the movie up again, I had to match everything that we had in the film. I had to recreate everything again. It was, so that was fine. They decided to go. They gave me 6 weeks to prepare the picture in Hamburg, and at the last minute, the Russians released all my equipment. I had M24 tanks and 50 caliber machine guns, you name it. And it was all brought out by truck to Studio Hamburg. And I asked to send my Czech assistant with it. And they did. George Zedek was his name.
Okay.
And George showed up with all my equipment. He was a terrific guy, a hard worker. He's now become one of the top, if not the top prop master in Czechoslovakia. He's probably retired now, too, if he's smart. But I saw him about 10 years ago. I went back and visited and found him, and he was working, and it was such a great reunion. But he came over, brought all my stuff, and he stayed and worked with me for the rest of the picture. And because of his prestige he got for coming out and working with us, they moved him up in celebrity, and he never was out of work again. He told me the money he was able to save being paid hard currency by the Yanks. He went home and bought himself a house, bought his family a summer house, got a car, because they were working for, the same. A banker got the same thing as an actor or director or a guy that swept the streets. It was all communist control.
Sure.
So he brought hard currency home and was able to live like a real human being. Such a nice guy. I'm so glad it happened for him.
That's a great story. That's fantastic. I'm amazed, although I shouldn't be, that there's a clause somewhere that's act of war. That's how they get out of having to pay people. That's amazing.
Right. You look at most contracts; they have a force majeure contract in it.
That's insane. That's very, very cool. Now, you mentioned that McQueen was kind of known for having sticky fingers. I wonder, and I don't want you to tell stories out of school if you don't want to, but I had heard rumors about Glenn Ford having that same sort of reputation, that he would walk away with props and pieces of the set. And also, I don't know if you know if that's true or not, but also any other sticky-fingered actors or actresses that you can remember.
I never worked with Glenn Ford, so I can't say.
Okay.
And one of the things, the problems a prop master has is keeping control and the whereabouts of everything, because you always have to have major props doubled, but you can't have, depending on the cost and the availability, a lot of them are antiques. So you do watch that very closely.
Sure.
I never had a problem with an actor that got away with something that I did. We would follow McQueen around on the set. I assigned a guy to him. And I said, as soon as McQueen looks like he's headed home, whether they released him or not from the set, you follow him wherever he goes and get that watch before he leaves the set. So we never lost a watch. But he took off. We'd have to catch him and get him back. And I'm sure the next day he would have said I left it at home or something. And then the third day he'd say I forgot it, and pretty soon it's gone.
I understand. Stories like that are in this incredible book. And really, congratulations. I'm bringing up the title. Hold on one second, because I want to get it right. Here it is. Steve McQueen, Lamaze in the Rearview Mirror. An excellent book from Marshall Terrell, your collaborator, and, of course, Don Nunley, who we've been speaking to today. So congratulations, and good luck with the book. It is out now, and I will tell people where they can get it. But great stories, sir, truly, and I hope that this book isn't the only representation of what are likely a lot of great stories about your adventures in Hollywood.
Well, John, I really enjoyed talking with you, and anytime you need a Hollywood story and you've got a hole in your schedule, give me a call.
Oh, it'd be my pleasure, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Don Nunley, man, I got to take him up on that offer and have him back because it's pretty obvious he's got some incredible stories. I want to hear about McHale's Navy and some of these other amazing movie and television shoots that Mr. Nunley had over his career. He also is responsible for doing product placement in films, and we didn't even talk about that. You got a sense of it given the sponsors that were involved in Lemmons. But that's another business that Mr. Nunley created, and a quite successful one as well. So we're going to have him back and give us more Hollywood stories. You know, I guess I misspoke when I said this film represented the beginning of the downfall of Steve McQueen, because that's not true. I mean, it was a momentary slump, but he came back with Junior Bonner, and The Getaway was a big success for him. And then, of course, he had The Towering Inferno and Papillon. So there were several big hits to follow for McQueen, but I'm sure there was a big dose of humility. Though you hear the stories about McQueen, and he really was a rebel till the end, so I don't know if he necessarily learned the lessons or not, but this book is really an incredible collection of the stories that happen on Lemmons, and Mr. Nunley tells them well, and I really urge you to pick up this book. Steve McQueen, Lemmons in the Rearview Mirror. The book is currently out. Pick it up today. We mentioned as well in the interview that proceeds from the book go to help the Water Foundation. The Water Foundation is a German concern. They are trying to get more clean water to the people that need it. I think it's a great cause. And you can find out more information if you go to water.foundation. That'll do it for today's episode of Word Balloon. I hope you enjoyed it. It was brought to you by InStock Trades at InStockTrades.com, where you'll find some incredible graphic novels at amazing prices. Don't forget, if your orders are $50 or more, you'll receive free shipping, and you'll find great books from the classic era of the 30s and 40s all the way to today's modern graphic novel classics. InStockTrades.com. Thanks again for listening. More great episodes on the way for April. I hope you'll join me. Until next time, Word Balloon is a copyright feature of Shaky Productions, copyright 2017.